Technology's mid-year webinar series, Proven Strategies to Drive Your Practice Revenue to Record Heights. My name is Yvonne Pelkey, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Before we get started, I would just like to take a moment to go over a few housekeeping items. First, the session is being recorded, and to help reduce the background noise, you are in listen-only mode. However, we do encourage questions, so please take a moment to locate the chat feature down at the bottom of your screen within Zoom. During our webinar, a guest speaker will be utilizing some resources that will be made available to you upon request once the webinar has been completed. The recording will be available to you by the end of the week, and you can find that either in the Need Help section of Edge Pro, as well as everyone on the call today will receive an email with a link to the recorded webinar. Because your feedback is invaluable for the continued success of our webinars, a survey link will be placed in the chat feature. Please take a moment at the end of the session to complete the survey. Ladies and gentlemen, today is the fourth in our series of 5 webinars. Our topic is the cost of hiring and how to hire in the digital age. As the eye care industry continues to evolve, I know many of us are faced with the challenges in hiring the best and the right optometrist that's aligned with our culture of our practices. On that note, I am very excited, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Brett Kestenbaum. Brett, before we get started, please take a moment to share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much, Yvonne. I appreciate the introduction there. My name is Dr. Brett Kestenbaum. I am actually a physical therapist and the co-founder and COO of Covalent Careers. I have been around the eye care industry since before I was born. My family owns a practice out in Long Island, New York, and I can remember back to the days going in and going into the lab and seeing how the lenses were manually cut with the frame patterns. So I've been around the industry for a very, very long time. Since graduating PT school, actually, I only practiced for maybe a year or so, but I have, for our own company here, Covalent Careers, I've hired over 15 employees. I've done hundreds and hundreds of interviews. I've screened thousands, probably tens of thousands of resumes. And as an organization, we've helped thousands of eye care practices with their hiring needs, from general staff to optometrists for the practice. Now, during this presentation today, there's a few things. It is a bit of a dry subject, hiring and how to hire in the digital age, but I'm going to try to make it as fun, as entertaining as humanly possible. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put those questions into the chat, and I will get to those questions at the end of the presentation. Now, during this presentation, what I want for you is to help you understand the changes impacting hiring in eye care. So we're just going to go through a brief history of hiring in eye care and what has changed along the way. Understanding the costs associated with hiring. Learning the changing job search behaviors of the new generation of professionals, because it's always important to understand those behaviors so that we can do an appropriate job attracting talent. And then finally, learn how to attract talent in this new market controlled by job candidates. So if we're able to accomplish all that today, I personally will be happy with the results here. So to kick things off, a brief history. And to go into that history, I'm going to be describing the 4 forces that have been changing employment, especially for optometrists, over the last 10 years. And force 1 is supply and demand. For those of you who have been in the industry a while, you may remember back to a time where hiring optometrists was pretty easy. In that time, there was an oversupply of optometrists, and there weren't as many open positions for the optometrists as there was supply. So it was very easy to hire. But since then, we have seen a shift in that supply and demand of clinicians. So a study was performed by the AOA in 2014, and they found that there's a shortage of actually 9,000 full-time equivalent optometrists in the country. So what does that mean? When we have a shift in supply and demand, when there is not enough supply to meet the demand, that means, especially when we're talking about recruiting and hiring, that means that the power now lies in the job seeker's hands, because each job seeker is going to be getting multiple offers for positions because there's more positions than there are optometrists. So why did this change happen? What were the factors that caused this supply and demand change to shift? Well, the first force there is the increase in patient population or demand for services. There has been more patients to treat. So there's been a few factors that have been causing there to be more patients to treat. And the first one is that the baby boomer population is aging. And with that aging, they require more medical services, and specifically eye care services as well. And we're seeing more patients that need not only glasses, but are having more medical conditions within their eyes as well. More patients to treat means an increase in demand. And when we have an increase in demand for services, then we're going to be seeing essentially an increase in the number of optometrists that are required to meet this demand. So practices have been expanding, which brings us to force number 3, which is the practice expansion. So from 2014 to 2017, we've seen that the top 50 retailers grew their number of practices by almost 10%. And for companies that were large to begin with, growing at 10%, that's a significant increase in the amount of practices in the country. Not only that, we've seen a lot of private equity coming into the eye care space, and not only buying out practices, but also opening up new practices. When you see there's an opportunity because there's all these new patients, that means that there's going to be new opportunity to generate revenue for these private equity groups, for these larger corporate entities, and also for the private practice. When those opportunities arise, we need the talent to fill those positions. And this fourth force that is occurring is attrition. So not only are the baby boomers entering the patient population, but they're also exiting the workforce. And this may be familiar to many of you who are listening to this webinar today, but a lot of people are trying to plan their transition out of practice. And part of those plans includes how to replace themselves as the doctor, meaning if you need to replace yourself, there needs to be another doctor to take over. And because there is not enough supply to meet the current demand, it's harder and harder for practices to replace themselves, because they'll need to attract that doctor that either wants to become a doctor owner or a partner, or someone who just wants to be working for an owner that may not necessarily be present in the practice. So this is presenting more of a challenge for the eye care practices, especially when planning those transition plans. So seeing all this data, we ran surveys here through both newgradoptometry.com and Covalent Careers, and we had 669 optometrists with graduation year between 2012 and 2017. And not surprisingly, we found that the respondents reported that finding jobs is not difficult. New graduate optometrists actually reported at a rate of 3.4 out of 10 on a difficulty scale. That was the average, meaning it wasn't very difficult for them to find jobs. And not only that, but optometrists find jobs fast. So if we look at the numbers, 51.3% of optometrists found jobs even before they graduated. And for the remaining 48.7%, the average time it took them to find a job was 3.5 weeks. So if we think about the pool of candidates who need jobs, the easiest or the group of people that we know will always need jobs is the new grad. They're coming out of school, they've never worked before, they're not currently in a position, they're going to need jobs. The other part of the pool are people who have been in practice but are looking for new jobs. And who are those people going to be? Those could be anyone from an optometrist who may be in a retail store that wants to start seeing more medical patients. So they're looking for a job that has a different mode of practice. Or it could be someone that is currently in a position where they're commuting a long distance and they want to decrease that commute time. Or it could be someone who is in a practice and they just simply want to make more money. These are the people who are going to be joining that pool of optometrists looking for new positions. But the majority of the pool in any given year is going to be that pool of new graduates. And again, like we're finding, the new grads are finding jobs before they even graduate. Over half of the students are finding jobs before they even graduate. And then the remainder are finding jobs within 3.5 weeks of graduation. So what that tells us is this time of year, that March through May or June, is a very, very, very important time of year when considering hiring, because that's when your candidates are going to be available, and then a lot of them are going to find jobs within that time period as well. So when thinking about hiring, thinking about the costs of hiring, or in some cases you can call it the costs of turnover, because if you have a turnover event, likely if you want to continue doing the same business that you were doing in the past, you're likely going to need to replace that person, so the costs of turnover. And a study run by Josh Bersin of Bersin and Deloitte. Josh Bersin is one of the leading names in HR and talent acquisitions in the United States for every industry. That study found that hiring costs can exceed 1.5 to 2 times a production employee's salary. So what's a production employee? It's a person who's in your company that is generating revenue for that company. And in this case, your optometrist is your production employee. So your costs of hiring are going to include vacancy costs, the cost of not having an optometrist seeing patients at your practice, your advertising costs, the costs of attracting talent, your screening, interview, and administrative costs. Those are your people costs, the time it's going to be taking to screen the candidates, interview the candidates, and then all of the administrative time that's going to go on with those specific events. Your training and your onboarding costs, those will factor more into the costs of turnover as well. And then important on the bottom here is lost engagement and cultural implications. Now, when we're thinking about the lost engagement and cultural impact, this is one of the major reasons why it's very, very important at your practice to focus on culture and not having turnover. So preventing turnover is something major that I know I'm very sure that eye care practices don't focus on, but it could be the best thing that you ever do for your practice, and it could be actually the thing that essentially saves you and makes you the most money in the end, because you're going to continue to have the staff on board. You're going to continue with not only a staff, but your optometrists, and your optometrists are going to become more productive over time. They're going to become more familiar with your patients. You're going to be able to generate more patient referrals and things like that. So lost engagement and culture, and you're also going to want to think about retention in a major way. A little caveat to that, though, we're not going to talk about retention in this webinar specifically. We can do maybe another webinar at another time, but this webinar is going to be focused on the costs of hiring and how to hire. So let's dive into each of these costs and the specifics for all of them. So when we're considering the vacancy costs, again, this is the cost that is associated with not having an optometrist at your practice to see the patients. It's that loss of revenue that's coming from that. So to calculate this, we're going to be looking at our average revenue per patients times our average patients per day times the number of days we have without an optometrist minus the employment cost minus cost of goods sold, and that's going to get our cost of vacancy. So why do we have to minus those employment costs and the cost of goods sold? Well, that's because those are the costs that are directly attributable to the revenue. So to get the revenue into your practice, you're going to need the employee and you're going to need the goods. So we're just going to minus those direct costs out of this calculation. Next, you have your advertising costs, and these are the costs that are associated with advertising your position. Now, just like you consider advertising for new patients, so too do you have to consider advertising when you need to hire new potential staff or optometrists for your practice. And those costs are going to be associated with creative time. How long does it take to write an effective job advertisement for your practice? The administrative time. How long does it take your team to post and manage your job advertisements? And then your cost of the audience. How much does it cost to run your ad to your target audience? So if you're thinking of cost of audience, just liken it to when you are running ads on Facebook or Google to try and attract new patients. It's that same thing. Facebook and Google are supplying you that audience for you to then describe your message to, and your message when you're trying to attract patients is healthier eyes, great frames and lenses, great service, whatever that message might be. Same thing when you're advertising for new employees and new optometrists for your practice. That next cost is your screening, interviewing, and administrative costs, which many people don't really think about these costs, but these are very important to think about and understand. And those costs can be calculated, first, your screening costs by number of candidates screened, time spent per candidate, times screening employee salary. So if you're thinking about this, you can say number of candidates screened. Let's say we've screened 15 candidates. Number of time spent per candidate. Let's say we're screening for 15 minutes per candidate. And then screening employee salary. So if your office manager is doing the screening, you would just calculate their hourly wage into that, $25, $30, $40 an hour, whatever you're paying that employee, you would calculate that into the costs because they're not able to do other work for you at that time that they're doing the screening. Then you have number of candidates interviewed. These costs are going to be increased. So for interview costs, we have number of candidates interviewed times time spent per candidate times the sum of interviewing employees' salaries. Now, sometimes you're going to have the doctor owner in your interviews for the candidates when they come to your practice. Sometimes it could be solely the doctor owner. Sometimes it can be the owner plus one staff member or the owner plus two staff members. But whatever that is, you're going to need to add all of their hourly wages together and then multiply that by the other two factors there, number of candidates interviewed and number of time spent per candidate to get your interview costs. And then you have your number of candidates processed times your average processing time times your employee salary. So number of candidates processed means how many resumes are you going to be receiving. So if you're posting your job and you're receiving 150 resumes and 140 of them are not qualified, that 140 resumes, the processing time that it takes to process each of those resumes has to be factored into your costs because each of those does take time, whether it's 2 minutes, 5 minutes, or just 1 minute each resume. That time does add up. Then you have your training and onboarding costs. This is where you're going to see a significant portion of costs as well in your training and onboarding. I would highly recommend investing in this area because better training, better onboarding is going to lead to a better candidate and employee experience for your practice, which, as we discussed before, is going to decrease the amount of vacancy and turnover that you have. It's going to decrease that turnover for you. Again, I cannot stress this enough. You're going to want to invest in your training and onboarding so that you can decrease your turnover in the end. It's sacrificing in the present to think about your future. So how do we calculate this? Well, we have lost productivity. So if we have an optometrist coming in, they're not going to be a new optometrist coming in, whether they're experienced or inexperienced, they're likely not going to be as productive as an optometrist that has been at your practice for a year, 2 years, 5 years. So to calculate that, you're going to take your average revenue per optometrist per whatever time variable, 1 week, 1 month, and then you're going to multiply that by the percent of lost productivity. So if you're bringing on a new staff member and they're 30% less productive, you're just going to multiply that average revenue per optometrist per week times that decrease in productivity. The next is your costs to develop training. So you're going to do effective training and onboarding, you're going to need to develop training and onboarding materials. So these costs are upfront costs that you can do one time, and then you will not have to do it again. Once you develop your materials, you'll be able to use them for multiple hires over the course or the history of your company. You'll probably want to change this and update it from time to time, but you are really going to incur the biggest cost in that development of these materials. And this is something that you should think more deeply about and spend the time and the money on developing this training. Next part is your cost of training and onboarding. So the number of hours spent training. So if you, the doctor owner, are the one training and onboarding your employee, you just, again, to calculate this, you're going to just multiply the number of hours spent training and onboarding times that the training employee's salary and the trained employee's salary as well. So this is where stuff gets real fun. So calculating your vacancy costs. So here we have some screenshots from the Edge, and I'm going to take you into the product in a moment just to show you how to get these vacancy costs. But the first things we're going to need to know are our optical revenue per exam and our clinic revenue per exam to get our costs. After that, we're going to need to know the number of OD hours per average doctor and the exams per OD hour. And then that will bring us to our calculation. So I just want to show you how to get all of these components, and we'll do the calculations together. So if we go into the Edge here, the first thing we're going to look at is our overview summary. And then within the overview summary, we're going to choose a date, and we're looking for averages here. So I took last year as the date. If you're at a different date, you can just click Update to look at that. You're going to want to come down to your bottom here, is where you're going to get your average revenue per exam total, your clinic revenue per exam here, and then your optical revenue per exam. Now, if you want to also look at benchmark statistics, you would come into your rankings here, and we're going to look at these because I'm going to run through two different calculations for you. First, I'm going to run through the calculation for this specific practice, and then I'll run through the calculation for the average practice for the eye care industry. So we could just take a look at what the difference in vacancy costs are for these two different practices. And then the final thing we're going to want to look at is our exam statistics so that we can get our average exams per OD hour. Now we'll just scroll down to the bottom of this report here to get our exams per OD hour. And remember, these are the exact statistics for your practice based on the metrics that you put into this tool here, or the metrics that you put into your EMR. So let's take a look at these numbers again. So if we look at the first numbers we want to find here are our average optical revenue per patient and our average clinical revenue per patient. So we'll find those numbers in our benchmark, again, in our Edge Pro rankings here. And what we found when looking at this report is, let me just take you back to the slides here because that was loading up. This is what we found here. So we have our optical revenue, $315. Our clinic revenue, $313. So if we look here, we plugged in 315 and 313. After that, we have our exams per hour, that 1.3 exams per hour. And then this is a calculation you'll have to do on your own here. Average OD hours per day. We'll just assume a general 8-hour workday. That will calculate for you your average number of patients per day, which is that main number that we need to calculate our vacancy costs. And then we'll look at our average days in OD works per week. So you may only have an OD on 1 day per week, 2 days per week, 3 days per week, whatever it may be. You know, you can put your numbers into this calculator. But let's just go with this 3 days per week now. Now we have our revenue broken out into clinical revenue, and we have it broken out into optical revenue. We do that so that we can remove our costs of goods sold, because part of this revenue is just in the costs of our product. So we're going to remove that out of our calculation of our weekly gross revenue from the new optometrist. And then to calculate our vacancy costs, we're going to look at the number of weeks without a doctor. So what we find at Covalent Careers, because it is becoming harder to find an optometrist, roughly on average, it will take about 3 months for an optometrist for an eye care practice to find an optometrist. And that's in an area where the candidates are not as scarce. So that'll be in your major metropolitan areas. If you are in a more rural area, or if you're not in any of the major cities, this number of weeks without a doctor, this can go up to anywhere from 6 months to 12 months. And we've seen in real rural areas, it take doctors years to find other staff, because you have to find that right doctor who's looking to move to your area, or may want to work with the specific patient population you have. But your pool of candidates when you are in more rural areas is going to be significantly less. So the final calculation that you're going to need here is your cost of employment. So you want to put your optometrist's annualized salary. If you're offering them health insurance premiums, just put the monthly premium that you're offering, your 401k match percentage if you're matching, and then your employment tax, the percentage of tax that your business is going to pay. This is going to vary by state. This is that federal level. And then you would just add your state or your local employment tax to the bottom here just to get your numbers. If they're working part-time, again, just put the annualized salary of whatever the part-time number would be. So, you know, if they're working part-time and you're doing 75,000 is going to be what they're going to be making over the course of that year. Just put it in this box here. And that's going to give us our total vacancy costs. So to get our total vacancy costs, we're going to look at the total weekly gross revenue from an optometrist, and we're going to be looking at that number times the amount of weeks that we are not generating this revenue. So we're not being able to see the patients, so we're not being able to generate this revenue, and that's going to give us our total vacancy cost here. If we can decrease the amount of time that it takes us to find an optometrist, it's going to cost us significantly less in these vacancy costs. And if it's going to take us more time, it's going to cost us significantly more. And I just wanted everybody to see this, because this is something that is overlooked the majority of the time when people have a vacancy in an optometrist position. They're not looking at these vacancy costs, and they're not looking at the magnitude of the costs to their practice. So it's just very important to calculate this into your decision making when you're looking at what strategies you want to take to try and attract new talent for your practice there. And for anyone out there, you will have access to all of the features that we have here. You'll have access to this vacancy calculator as well. We will send that out. All right, so now we know a little bit about the history, and we know a little bit about the costs of associated with hiring. So the next thing we need to understand is how do we attract that talent? And the first thing that we want to go over here is the specific behaviors that job seekers have. Now, if you've been in the industry for a long time, you may remember the days when people were looking for jobs, they were looking in the yellow pages, or they were looking in classified ads, and they were calling up your practice, asking your practice if you have a vacancy, and they were being more proactive. And unfortunately, we've moved to a time where job seekers are in more demand than the practices. So back in the day when there were actually optometrists calling practices to see if they had jobs, they were doing that because there were less jobs available than there were optometrists who were looking for jobs. So again, the supply and demand curve has shifted, and so too has the way that job seekers are looking for and finding jobs. And what are people doing now? Well, they're on their mobile devices. We spend a significant portion of our day on our mobile devices, going through social media, going to do Google searches. Wherever we are, we're on our mobile devices. If we're doing job search, a study was actually conducted by Indeed.com, and they found that 78% of job seekers use mobile devices for their search. And that was in 2017, so we can only imagine what that number is now. It's probably more like 90 to 95%. And these numbers are not just millennials. I know everybody likes to talk about millennials and how they're different than everybody else and they're doing different behaviors, but everybody is using their mobile phones for all sorts of search at all times. So this is not just millennials. If you're trying to attract optometrists from another generation, they are on their mobile phones as well. So this is a major consideration that you have to have. Another important point that I was just mentioning was the job seekers used to call practices to see if they have vacancies. That does not happen anymore. Job seekers are more reactive than they are proactive now. Maybe what we see is 1 out of 400 job seekers will be proactive in terms of calling up practices, but the majority are looking for the job advertisements online, and they are going to be searching multiple different websites and multiple different means to try and find those jobs online. The other behaviors that's changed is the specific attractive forces that job seekers are looking for. So in the past, people, job seekers, professionals, whatever it may be, their main considerations for practice used to be specifically things like location and salary, but that has shifted. And although those are always going to be major considerations, location and salary, What the job seekers are really looking for is that culture fit. What is the experience like at your practice? What is the culture at your practice? Are they going to fit in? Are they going to enjoy their time that they spend at work? We spend the majority of our lives at work. So nowadays people are looking for how is that time going to be spent and who are those people that I'm going to be spending it with? So attracting candidates. We understand the job seeker's behavior. So how do we attract candidates? There are two major approaches that are used to attract candidates. The first is outbound talent acquisitions, and that's going to be your cold calls to candidates, your email campaigns, your direct mail campaigns. That's active. Your outbound is active search. You're actively searching for candidates. And then you have your inbound talent acquisitions. This is not passive, but it's more passive than your active search. In inbound talent acquisitions, there is time that's spent to set these things up, but then you have people who are inquiring to your practice or about your position in an inbound approach. And those things are going to be your employer branding, your content marketing, your retargeting, things like that. And we'll go into those in more detail in a moment here. So let's start with outbound talent acquisitions. Outbound talent acquisitions are going to have a high cost upfront in your time, and that time is going to be spent doing research, your targeting, and your information collecting. So to be able to perform these activities, your cold calling, your email campaigns, and your direct mail, you're going to need information. You're going to need the person's phone number. You're going to need the person's email address. You're going to need the person's physical address. And you're going to need to spend the time researching, where do I find that information? And then you're going to have to put that information together. So you're going to need to go through resume databases. You're going to need to purchase directories. You're going to need to go through LinkedIn. Then you're going to need to compile all that information into a way that you're going to be able to go through and call the candidates and email them and direct mail them. How are they going to know about you if you are not trying to find them? What I can tell you is that candidates who are passively looking are not going to be looking for your practice. So that's an important point here. There are two different types of job seekers. There's an active job seeker, and then there's a passive job seeker. An active job seeker is that type of job seeker who is actively seeking new employment. It's going to be that new graduate who just graduated from school and they are 100% in need of a job. So they are doing things actively. They're going online, they're searching for new jobs, and they are very specifically typing searches into Google like optometrist jobs or optometrist jobs near me or optometrist vacancies or whatever those search terms are on Google. They're going to be actively looking for those new jobs. The passive job seeker is the job seeker who is either completely, you know, they don't like their job, but they're not actively searching for new jobs just because they're comfortable with the status quo, the way things are, or they may be happy in their job, but they would be open to new opportunities if they happen to hear about those new opportunities. Those are your passive job seekers. And those are job seekers that are not going to be searching Google or anywhere else for optometrist jobs or optometrist jobs near me. They're going to be the ones who are going to need to be attracted in different ways, either through outbound, calling them, emailing them, sending them direct mail so that they can know about your opportunity and have a conversation with you, or through these inbound techniques. They may see your brand somewhere when let's say they're scrolling through Facebook and then they are looking at an article that you wrote about macular degeneration, and then they click on a link within that article that says, you know, eye care practice in Long Island, New York, hiring. That'll be going on in your content marketing. And then your retargeting would be those ads following them around Facebook or Google, those creepy ads that you're always wondering, you know, how do they know I've been looking at shoes, or how do they know I've been looking at different dresses, or whatever. The ads that are following you around, that's retargeting. So all of that's going to be your inbound talent acquisitions, trying to attract both active and passive job seekers with that inbound talent acquisitions.
Hey, Brad.
So again, yes.
Just one quick question. So back to your previous slide that you had just a second ago, do you find that, is there one method better than another? Do we draw out a better candidate or somebody who is more aligned with, you know, the culture of our practice and what we're looking for? Is one better than the other? Should we focus on one more so than?
That's a great question. The answer is that the best approach is essentially a 360-degree approach, doing everything. And when you were just describing fit and things like that, finding that person and helping that person find you is going to be more so coming in this inbound talent acquisitions approach. Specifically because they need to be able to learn about your practice. So if you think about culture and words that experience and words that are going to describe your practice, let's go back to the patient side of things. When a patient comes to or wants to learn more about you, they're going to be searching Google for optometrist near me, whatever it might be, and they're going to get to your website, which you've spent time and money designing that website so that it can speak to the patient. You have an about page. It talks about your practice. It talks about the history of your practice. We've been in practice for 20 years, and we've been servicing the community, and we treat these things, and we're a family practice. So you're talking about your company, and you need to think about talent acquisitions in that same way. You want to promote your brand. When we're talking about fit and culture and long-term, we're looking at this inbound talent acquisitions approach. But at that same time, we also need to be reaching more people because again, the candidates are the scarcity. So it's going to be harder to attract the talent. So if we're not taking this outbound approach, the people who are going to beat you to that candidate. And in this day and age, you have your larger corporate companies. All of those larger corporate companies have an entire organization. They have an internal recruiting organization. So they are reaching out to those candidates actively every single day, trying to find candidates to fill their open positions. So to compete with that, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I love that because I have always found that the best candidates for any position that I may have been looking for within a practice has always been from the ones that I've sought out through something like LinkedIn, because they're the people that are the happiest. They're not looking for another position somewhere. So I've always found that utilizing LinkedIn has been incredibly valuable.
Right, exactly. So you're going to be able to find those candidates who may not be disgruntled, or they may not have just gotten fired, or whatever it might be. They're not actively searching for positions. And then the other part of that is that fit part, which will be you need to be able to promote that fit through either inviting them in and taking them out to lunch, or meeting the team, having them come and visit the practice, which is more labor intensive. But the other side to be able to do that at scale is with your inbound talent acquisitions, your employer branding, your content marketing. So this part is really finding the people, and then this part of it is convincing the people. But actually, this part is both finding and convincing the people being the candidates. So as you were just describing there, your social media, your LinkedIn, that's got to be a huge part of this outbound strategy. Friends and colleagues, frame and lens reps. This should be your first focal point of your search. Are you asking your frame and lens reps, hey, do you know of any doctors that may be looking for new positions in the area? Because they're going to be talking to everybody. They're at every single practice. They're at all of your competitors' practices around. So they're actually going to have a lot of insights into what's going on in the industry. And then your friends and colleagues. Hey, Dr. Smith, do you happen to know any ODs that are looking for a change, or someone who's just graduating that's looking for a job? I've got a great position open in my practice. And then, like you were talking about, Yvonne, the social media, the LinkedIn, the Instagram, things like that. Mostly I would focus this outbound approach on LinkedIn here. Or the outbound approach here, you would be going and searching for resume databases to find some of that information. But what I do want to explain and express is that these larger organizations, they are doing all of this, and they have a list of everybody's phone numbers, and they're calling every single one of them every single day. So they're really aggressive here, which is why it's even more challenging for the private practices to hire. Because simply put, typically if you're an optometrist owner, you don't have time to spend half your day cold calling optometrists to try and get them to join your practice. So the other side of this that we were just discussing is inbound talent acquisition. So what does this look like? Well, this would be you having your recruiting pages, just like your website, again, that we were just describing to market to your patients. You're going to have your recruiting pages, your company bio, that's going to be specifically marketing to new employees for your practice. And on that page or anywhere else, you're going to have content. So you're going to have articles. And these articles can be written by you to try and attract the audience that you're looking to attract. And who better to write these articles than their peer? So these articles can be anything. They don't have to be about your practice. They don't have to be about hiring. They don't have to be about talent acquisitions. They could be about macular degeneration and the way that you, and I'm not an optometrist myself, so I don't know the specific equipment or the techniques, but the way that you utilize X piece of equipment to diagnose that at your practice, whatever that piece of content might be. And you want to use that to, again, attract these job seekers to look more at your practice, and then they'll be able to find that opportunity that you have associated with this recruiting page as well. Videos. So you can do videos, and you can do those like employee testimonials, or you as the doctor owner can get on a video and you can be describing the mission and the vision of your practice. Why did you get into practice? What is it that made you become an OD? How have you used your experience as an optometrist to help serve your community? You know, why should they choose your practice over the Walmart next door? Those type of things. And a lot of times you're going to be competing for the same talent with organizations that are going to be offering a higher salary than you. So this right here is very, very, very important in helping to convince these candidates that, hey, it's a better experience to work for a company that's focused on X, Y, and Z, and our mission is this. And this is the reason why that you'll be happier here. And we've had our entire staff here for 25 years, and all of the doctors here have been with us for 20 years. And now we have more patients to see than ever before, which is why we need a new team member on our team. And then finally,
hey, Brett.
Yeah.
So sorry. The content, this is speaking to the web page or to your recruiting page?
So with content, you're thinking about any type of content that you can create. So content can be your articles, your videos, your employee testimonials, and you can host those pieces of content anywhere. But with those, you're going to want to have a strategy that eventually the content links back to, hey, we have a job opening. Because then the person who's reading that content will be able to find your job opening and then be able to learn more about your practice and then either call you or apply for your job or whatever that process might look like.
Yeah, and I think what's, so important these days is more and more optometric practices that are becoming medically focused. Like, what a great opportunity to highlight and celebrate, some of the specialty things that you do within your practice. And I think that speaks to your content as it relates to articles. And, I can think of a couple of different practices throughout the years that I've worked with who really honed in on what the specialty of the practice was and just really took that, to the next level. And, not only from a patient perspective, but it's incredibly attractive for, another optometrist or even another employee member that is looking to help support, the mission.
That's exactly right. So you hit the nail on the head there. So let's say you have a pediatric practice and you're trying to attract a doctor that's interested in pediatrics. Well, you're going to want to write an article on that. How we implemented pediatrics in our practice to service a community of 10,000 or whatever that might be. And then people that are interested in that subject, that's your target audience, are going to be reading that article. And then again, within that article, you're going to want that to link to pediatric optometrist position open in your area or whatever that might be. And that will link to your recruiting page, which then would link to your job opportunity. If you do have a recruiting page, it can link there. If you just have the job opportunity, it can link just directly to the job opportunity. But that's that 360-degree strategy that I'm describing here. So the next part of this is, how do you disseminate this information? How can people find this stuff? So that's your social strategy. When thinking about your social strategy, I would focus on these two right here. Your Instagram, because this is where people are spending the most time, and this is where you can put the pictures of your practice. This is where you can put the videos of your practice, and people on Instagram can consume that very quickly. And then your LinkedIn, you want to focus on LinkedIn because your content will be in the right context. What I mean by that is the reason you go to LinkedIn is for professional reasons, not for social reasons. So you go to LinkedIn because you're looking for jobs or because you're looking for professional information. So this is really where you want to focus a lot, the majority of your time, and then these two are where you want to focus that true bulk. Instagram should always be a part of that process. Twitter and Facebook,
Hey.
yeah.
I'm so sorry, Brett. I just have like tons of questions because I think about, all of these strategies that we have, at our fingertips. I think, you spoke just a minute ago, like LinkedIn definitely needs to be, the professional aspect of that. But what are your thoughts on making or creating or kind of implementing some of the culture of the practice? Like, I don't know, I can think of a couple of different practices, just even outside of optometry, who kind of get out in the community and they post that on their Instagram page and they show things that their teams have done. And it kind of highlights, again, the culture of the team and, all of that. What are your thoughts on incorporating some of that into Instagram?
Yeah, 100%. So you're going to want, so that's where this recruiting page comes in as well. So you'd want to put those things on Instagram, and you'd want that Instagram feed to link to your recruiting page, because on Instagram or LinkedIn, they're going to get the video of your practice cultural things, and I'm going to touch on those in a few more slides here. But you want your Instagram, that's going to be single posts. And then once someone's reading that, you want them to go over to your recruiting page so they can see everything about your practice. So you do 100%. If you're taking your team out for a bowling event or an ice skating event or whatever that might be, you want to be capturing those stories, because that's what's going to attract talent these days, is the culture. Am I going to be having fun with the people that I'm working with? So yes, that's a very good point there. And then again, you want to host those videos on your recruiting pages, just like you'd want to host it on your about page to attract those patients. So here's what some of that can look like. On your recruiting page, maybe you want something that shows your team in action. And then you'll want something like a fun photo. And then, there's other fun photos over here. And then you'll want something like if you do a company offsite or a bowling event, just showing your team engaging outside of that work environment. Maybe they're working during this engagement on the work, maybe they're not, but the bowling pictures, all of that stuff that Yvonne, you were just talking about, you want here. And then you can share that information onto Instagram. I know this is all very high level for people, and it may be challenging to see how this all works in aggregate, but you would take these pictures and then you would post them onto Instagram as well. And then same thing, so on this recruiting page or wherever, you're going to want to talk about your core values. So is this job seeker going to want to work for the company that's seeing 30 patients an hour, or do they want to work for the company that's the champion for the new graduate and that's going to be offering mentorship and education and providing guidance on the new graduate's future? Are they going to be wanting to work for the practice that is stagnant, or are they going to be wanting to work for the practice that's always looking to make changes, get to the root cause of any problems that's occurring at the practice, and always trying to improve? Are they going to want to work for the practice that is just closed-minded and set in their ways, or are they going to want to work for the practice where everybody's open-minded, truthful, and transparent, and if there's a conversation that comes up, it's received, it's well received, even if it's a difficult conversation to have? So these pages are very, very important to express your culture and what it's like and what your practice is all about. And then finally, here would be an example of an article, Optometrist Resumes, Do's and Don'ts. Maybe you do want to write an article about resumes so you can attract job seekers. And then that can lead to your company page. And then when they go to your company page, they would learn more about your company and see your job openings, things like that. So to wrap it all up, in this day and age, the supply can't meet the demand for optometrists, meaning that it's more on the employer's plate to try and attract talent, because these job seekers, these optometrists, are going to be getting 3, 4, 5 offers for jobs. There's more practices hiring than there are optometrists. The cost that you want to focus on is decreasing your vacancy cost, because that's going to be the bulk of the costs associated with this hiring event for you. Again, you want to just recognize that job seekers' behaviors have changed, and although we don't like those changes, we do need to recognize that it is a reality, and we need to work our recruiting strategies to align with the new behaviors of the job seeker. And then finally, a well-rounded inbound and outbound approach to recruiting is the best practice and will help you win out in the long run. At this time, I'd like to take some questions. If you have any specific questions on things that can be relevant to your practice or anything that I can answer for you, happy to take those questions now.
Brett, I have one more question while we're waiting for our attendees to fill in any questions that they might have. So the OD vacancy calculator, so is that geared more for like understanding the impact that the loss of revenue per se because we don't have an OD, or can it be spun around in a way where, you know, let's just say that we have an optometric practice that, you know, we have one doctor, he's at capacity, and it's now time to start thinking about, you know, adding on another OD, you know, to prevent, you know, people from leaving because the wait time is too long, or we want to take a new, you know, major medical plan, or we're going to add, you know, a specialty area to the practice. So can this be utilized to spin that way as well to kind of show projected revenue growth?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can look at this for sure as an opportunity calculator. You can simplify your calculations as well. So let's say at your practice, you know that you can book 5 more patients per day on average, 3 days per week. So you can just plug in your 5 here. This is where the calculation's off of. These two numbers, if you just use it in the regular way, will calculate your number of patients per day. But just to simplify things, we could change this number here. Your average days per week. You would be looking at your average optical revenue and your average clinical revenue, and then you can look and see how much opportunity you have on a given week. If you're going to be making a gross margin, you're going to want to look at the costs that are going to be associated with bringing on a doctor. The trickier part for what you just described, Yvonne, would be calculating, do you need more staff to handle this increase in doctor hours? If so, then that additional staff would need to be calculated, with which this specific calculator does not calculate in. The other things that you would need to calculate in would be for the opportunity side. Let's think. Well, staff would probably be the big one. Or if you don't have like enough exam lanes and you need more equipment, you would have to look at those upfront costs for your equipment to see if you can make a return on adding a new doctor.
Yeah, I think that's pretty valuable too, because even though we've got, you know, some doctors that are looking to exit, you know, in 3 or 5 years, this is a great resource to kind of project, you know, what he or she might need to do. But, you know, from the flip side of it, I could see how invaluable this calculator could be in kind of figuring out what that return on investment would look like if we were to, you know, bring on another OD for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's right. And
so I think
you can also run calculations. So when you have the edge and you know your numbers, you can also run calculations, and they wouldn't be in this calculator. We can always build a new calculator, but you can always run numbers that would say, if I increase my marketing costs and can attract more patients, you know, where will I see a return on that? How much will the return be? How much can I spend in marketing to create a return for my business as well? So let's say you have a doctor that has that's working 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, but they're only seeing, you know, 0.5 patients per hour, and they understand that they can see 1 patient per hour, or even 2 patients per hour. So there's more time left in your booking schedule. You can calculate out how much should I spend on marketing to be able to fill up my OD schedule. So that's just a different way you can think about things as well.
I love it. I love it. And so I think that's, you know, probably huge. I know that we've had a couple of individuals ask for access to the OD vacancy calculator. And if you wouldn't mind, Brett going to our slide deck and just putting on the very last slide when you're done. But this is Dr. Kestenbaum's contact information, and for those individuals that really wanted to have a copy of his OD vacancy calculator, you can email him at the email address that you see on the screen. We have just a couple more minutes. Brett, was there anything else that you wanted to kind of wrap up, or?
That's the main thing. I think just getting into that mindset of thinking about the hiring of an optometrist and the vacancy in a different way is important. A lot of the tactical stuff, the marketing assets that you'd need to create, the company pages, those type of things, it may be a little high level to understand what that all looks like and how it all functions and how that would lead to better hiring events faster. But it's just the best way to think about it is just trying to create in your mind an analogy to trying to attract patients to your practice. Same thing you're going to need to try and attract. You're basically doing the same exact things to try and attract talent for your practice. So that's the big
Awesome.
thing. If you do want to get in touch with me, Brett at covalentcareers.com. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about any subject that I can be of value to you on, really anything in this employment space. If you have questions about employment agreements or employee handbooks or anything HR related, happy to answer those questions. If you do have questions about attracting talent for your practice, whether it's staff members or optometrists, I'm always happy to lend a helping hand there. And then finally, thinking about the different ways that you can use your numbers for your practice is going to be it's going to make a huge impact for you if you're looking to grow and if you're looking to increase your bottom line at your current practice, or if you're looking to expand that practice into multiple practices as well. The numbers are very, very important there.
I couldn't agree more, Brett. And I tell you, I wish I had talked to you 2 or 3 months ago. I found myself in a very similar situation, and your resources could have been, pretty invaluable for me. But Brett, I want to thank you for being our guest speaker for today. It was incredible learning, and I know I learned a ton, and I'm sure our attendees did as well. For those of you that have the EDGE, if you need some additional support or additional training sessions on how to access some of the numbers that Brett discussed today during his session, you can click on the Need Support, the link up on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. And for those of you that don't have EDGE Pro and would like some additional information on, how EDGE Pro can benefit your practice and to provide you some of the resources that you could use to determine OD vacancy costs, or just, whatever some of the other topics that we've had previously. Just a couple of reminders. This recording will be available to everybody by the end of the week. You can find it under Need Help on EDGE Pro, and also as a reminder, it will be in your email box at the end of the week. Again, there was a survey that was put into the chat box, so please take a moment. Your feedback is incredibly important to us. And just as a reminder, our 5th webinar is next week. It's going to be with Dr. Vargo from IDOC, and his topic is going to be taking your practice to the next level. So I just want to thank everybody again for being part of our 4th webinar, and I hope everybody has a fantastic week.
Thanks, Yvonne.
You're welcome.